Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Sander from Pembroke Publishers, and thanks for joining us this evening for our webinar. Just before we get started, I would like you to know that together we are representing communities from across Canada, and I invite you to reflect on the territory from which you are joining us today as I acknowledge the traditional land where Pembroke Publishers' office is located in Toronto, Ontario. Pembroke Publishers' office is situated upon the traditional territories and ancestral lands of the Mississaugas, Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. And we recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples and seek a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their enduring presence continues to enrich the vibrancy of all our communities. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this evening. I was reflecting as we were getting started here. COVID was a very interesting time for all of us, and we all have our own stories in terms of kind of what happened and what went on. And I think I feel very privileged to be introducing Dr. David Costello today because I don't think I would have ever met him without COVID. And I can call him now a friend, and we have conversations offline, and when we meet each other, and it's always a great time. And his passion for math education, you will see today if you haven't heard him speak before, and you get the opportunity, I highly recommend it. As the Pembroke Publisher science nerd, I'll even go to math and learn from him. So it's great to have the next hour together, David. And I know you have many books out there, but your new one, What's Missing in Math Instruction, is talking about some of the research around the science of learning, an area that I'm passionate about as well. But you tying it into math, I think everyone here today is looking forward to your thoughts and finding ways to support kids in math. So I'll pass it over to you. And on behalf of everyone here today, welcome. We're really looking forward to this session with you.
Thank you so much, Lionel, for the introduction. And it's great seeing some of the comments in the chat box and the welcome. And I'm seeing people that I've worked with from all across Canada and in the United States as well. So thank you so much for giving up your time to coming to this webinar. Really appreciate it. And like Lionel said, this is my latest book, What's Missing in Math Instruction. And I really think you're going to find tonight's session helpful and something practical that you can take back to your classroom immediately. And we're just going to jump right in. So my email is david@costellomath.com. I'm on Twitter, or X as it's called, @Dr_Costello. I have a math website, costellomath.com, and I'm on Facebook. So let's get going. And please feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions, connections, wonderings, aha moments, because we're going to do our best to keep track of this. Lionel and I'll look through this. So please, because we would like to make this as engaging and as conversational as we can. So this is the image that comes to mind when I think about a lot of math classes and a lot of math education. I think so many times in math, as teachers, as educators, we've been focused on getting stuff into the heads of students. So we're just pouring stuff into the bucket. We're just pouring it, and we're trying to make sure that we, quote unquote, cover all the curriculum and all the standards. And we're just making sure that we're getting everything out there and that students can interact with everything. And I think coming from that, I think that's where we're seeing a fallacy in math, because it's not just about getting things into the heads of students. It's about how do we support students in using these concepts and in using this mathematical understanding? Because what's the point of quote unquote teaching a concept and having students work with it if we're not supporting them in being able to know when to use it and how to use it? So what we're going to be talking about tonight is the content is very much important, but we're going to be supporting students in being able to retrieve and apply their prior learning to solve problems. Because just put yes or no in the chat box. Have you ever spent time teaching a concept and you're like, okay, students have this, only to find out in a few weeks or two that they cannot apply it whatsoever? They don't know when to apply it. They don't know how to apply it. Has that ever happened to you? Or is that just a PEI thing that's happened to me? Because so many times I've seen students struggle being able to apply their prior learning. And I'm seeing Aaron type yes, Cindy yes. So yeah, Gail. So tonight's about, and this work is about, how can we support students in understanding the mathematical concepts and being able to apply them. So we're going to be pushing the boundary some tonight too. So what I want you to do, some of the things we're going to be talking about might not be things that you do in your classroom, or might not be things that you've seen a lot of focus on. But what I want you to think about is critically about your students or the schools you support, and think about, why are we doing what we're doing? Are we doing it because we know it's evidence-based and we've seen it work? Or are we doing it because we've always done it? And pushing the boundaries, we're going to talk about the science of learning. Now, I know many of you would have heard a lot about the science of reading, but this is not just about math. This is not just about reading. This is about how we learn, and how can we use this learning process to help inform our instruction. And within the science of learning, there's really 3 different categories I want to talk about. We're focused on learning. So we're aiming to understand how people learn, how they acquire new knowledge, and how they develop skills. But it's also evidence-based. It relies on research and empirical evidence to inform teaching and learning practices. So we're going to share practices that have a proven track record, and it's just not me rambling from Prince Edward Island, but, oh, I think you should try this, or I think you should try this. No, these are practices that have proven effective and that have quality evidence supporting them. And it's about the application. The goal is to improve educational outcomes by applying findings to classroom settings and learning environments. So we're taking this research and this evidence, and we're supporting it and being used in the classroom. So I just want you to picture this. What goes through your mind when you plan instruction? What image do you have? Because when I speak with teachers, and it's regardless of what grade level they teach or where they teach, is they all say they spend so much time on planning instruction. They're like, we're looking at the outcome. We're trying to figure out, okay, this is the outcome. And we're looking through our resource. And we're trying to find all these different things to use in the classroom. They're like, and we're spending all this time, and we're hoping for this great impact or this great value added. But what they get is something like this. Now, I don't know about where you're living right now, but with the frost coming up in spring in PEI, this is what many of our roads look like. So we have teachers spending all this time in planning, but they're not seeing their goals achieved. They're not seeing students have the success they want. So what we have is, we have big goals, but we're having limited results. Now, can you put a yes or no in the chat box? Do you ever feel like that? You have great goals for your classroom in terms of student learning. You're putting in all the time and effort into planning it, but you're not seeing the value added in terms of their work, and you're not seeing the intended learning goals being met. Do you ever feel that way or experience that? Because we do put a lot of time and effort in, and it seems like everybody's putting yes, yes. We're putting a lot of time and effort in. And what is contributing to that? I think it's a traditional view of how we approach learning. Learning has been viewed as getting things into the heads of students. We've kind of looked at our year plan and be like, okay, I'm doing this outcome here or this standard here throughout the year, and we approach it in a linear way, and we compartmentalize the concepts, and we teach, test, and move on. And that's called a block practice. where we isolate concepts, where we focus on them and only that concept, and we teach, test, and move on. But what's important is what's taught is not necessarily what's learned. And what I mean by that is just because we've taught something doesn't mean students have learned that. And what comes from that is that students can get quote unquote good grades. However, they're not really understanding the concept and knowing when to apply it. So students in getting these strong grades, they're having an illusion of mastery. They're thinking, and teachers are too, because students are getting the correct responses, that they know this, but they don't really understand it. They have the illusion of a mastery. And then an example would be, let's say that I'm teaching division right now in grade 5. And right now I could be working with 3-digit by 1-digit division problems. So the teacher's going to spend every problem on division. And then the teacher's going to give a sheet or some problems, word problems, that have 3 by 1 division. Well, the students don't even have to do those don't even have to read the problem to know I take the 3-digit number and I'm going to divide it by the 1-digit number. That's what we're seeing in math. We're having students who can apply, who can quote unquote do the concept because it's block practice, but they're not understanding it. So we need to broaden our view of learning. And what I mean by that is we need to view learning as not only the acquisition of knowledge and skills, but it's having them readily available from memory to support future meaning-making opportunities. Because here's my question for you. What's the point of students knowing a concept if they can't apply it? We need students to be able to apply their learning to solve problems. Think about back to the visual with the water buckets. It's not enough to fill those buckets. We need students to be able to walk with those buckets and to be able to use that to solve problems. So what I'm going to propose based on the science of learning is that we're going to move from this as results to this smooth, smooth sailing, the nice smooth roads. So what we have here is, sorry. What we have here is we're going to look at an approach that will help us move forward with this. And this approach is going to consist of 4 instructional shifts. And the 4 shifts that form the foundation for what's missing in math in instruction are explicit instruction, application, metacognition, and question, focus, and format. We're going to go through these 4 instructional shifts that can be applied to any math instructional block or any math model. And you're going to see how to use it in the classroom, what it looks like, and the rationale behind it. So we're going to start with explicit instruction. This is our first instructional shift. So explicit instruction is a direct and structured approach where teachers clearly explain and model new concepts or skills. They provide opportunities for guided and independent practice, and they offer frequent, specific feedback to ensure student understanding and mastery. So students understand it and they're able to master it. And the science of learning strategy to support this is cognitive load theory. And what do we mean by cognitive load theory? Well, it's really this. At the heart of cognitive load theory is the notion that our brain has limited memory resources, specifically within working memory. And that working memory is easily overwhelmed when processing large amounts of new information, which results in reduced comprehension and retention. So think about this. Think about our brain as a pop bottle. The majority of the bottle, let's say the bigger space, is a long-term memory. And long-term memory has significant capacity in there. That's the bigger space. So that would be where our prior learning is. However, working memory, think of working memory as the actual opening of the bottle where the cover goes. It's a small opening. Working memory has a very limited amount of resources. And when that working memory becomes overwhelmed, students can't retrieve prior learning in their long-term memory. So students can't retrieve that. They're not able to apply their prior learning. So we can't overwhelm students with complexity because that will lead to reduced comprehension and retention. So therefore, our instructional design model needs to avoid overloading it. And the highly technical term, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek, that is used for cognitive load theory is called chunking. And what chunking is, it breaks down complex information into smaller manageable units. And by doing this, we're improving learning and retention. So chunking addresses the limited capacity of working memory by organizing information into meaningful groups, thereby reducing the cognitive load and making it easier for learners to process and remember information. So what that means is that we're taking complex information and we're chunking it into manageable bits, manageable building blocks. And from that, students will move through those. And as they understand that building block, they're going to layer other building blocks onto it. So they form a stronger understanding of it, and it leads to mastery. And we've seen this everywhere. We've seen this everywhere. It's not just school that uses this theory of cognitive load theory and chunking, but it's also other businesses. Now, full disclosure, I love Lego. I love it. I probably spend too much money on it. But I'm going to use it as an example. So if I wanted to buy the Titanic set of Lego, it would have 9,090 pieces. Now, if you're familiar with Lego, you know all those pieces aren't just loose inside the box. I'm just not opening up that box, dumping it out, and 9,090 pieces aren't just going to fall out. Instead, Lego knows we can't overwhelm people. So we're going to chunk it up. And the first way that they chunk it up is that they have it set in 3 larger boxes inside. Box 1, box 2, and box 3. Now, this will show you how little I know about boats. But box 1's like the front of the boat, box 2 is like the middle of the boat, and box 3 is like the end of the boat. There's a stern and a bow on the boat, but I have no idea. So cognitive load theory, they are chunking it into 3 smaller parts. But they do something much more than that. Within each box, box 1, they have certain pieces for that specific part of the ship. But they have pieces compartmentalized into different bags. And each bag has a number on it. But it takes it one step further than that. Each box has an instruction booklet that tells you step 1, step 2, and step 3. And it takes you through that until you end up with this beautiful replica of the Titanic. Now, notice, it doesn't lose the complexity of the Titanic, and it doesn't remove the beauty of it. Students will still get to put together the complete Titanic, and everybody will. But what it does is it makes it manageable so you don't get overwhelmed and give up. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Because can you please put that in the chat box? Because I know if I opened a box and there was 9,090 pieces and no chunking of it, I'm just not bothering with that because I'd be too overwhelmed. Even though I would want to do well with it, it would be too much and I wouldn't be able to do it. So this is what cognitive load theory is. This is how we learn. Our working memory is not going to become overwhelmed because when our working memory becomes overwhelmed, we lose access to our prior learning. So if it makes sense in this case, why aren't we doing it with our students when we're going over concepts? Now we're focusing on math tonight, but it really applies to all subjects. And an example of what chunking in action would look like, let's say we're talking about grade 4, grade 5, and we're looking at comparing fractions. Well, I'm just not going in on day one and getting students to compare and order fractions. I first have to chunk it down to see how my students are doing with these concepts. Do they understand the meaning of a fraction? So, can they label and represent a fraction? Can they do equivalent fractions and the meaning of equivalent fractions? Can they compare fraction using benchmarks? Can they compare fraction with like denominators? Can they compare fraction with like numerators? Can they compare fraction with unlike numerators and unlike denominators? And then can they order fractions? So many times I'll go in and I'll see students trying to compare and order fractions when they've not yet even understood how to compare fractions. So why would we have them ordering 3 and 4 sets of fractions when they can't compare two fractions? So we really have to consider these are the parts that we need to chunk up so that students can build success on success, kind of like the Lego example. Now, can you just give me a thumbs up or tell me, can you see a place for explicit instruction and chunking in the classroom? It's like when I go into work with teachers and they're telling me that they're working on a concept. Have we thought about chunking it up so we can support students in understanding the foundational aspects of it and then they can build it up? That's what we need to do in classes, because when we see students who are overwhelmed and who can't apply learning that they already have, it's because their working memory is overwhelmed and their executive functioning skills are overwhelmed at that point, and they just can't access the prior learning. So that was instructional shift 1. And I'm sorry for going fast, everyone. I just want to make sure that I give a complete overview of the 4 shifts. So next we have application. This is instructional shift 2. And what application is, teachers must adjust instruction to include opportunities for students to determine which concept to apply, how to apply it, and review if their application was accurate. It's not enough for students to practice a concept. Students need to do more than practice. What students need to do is they need to understand the concept and need to know, when do I apply this concept and how do I apply it? And how we're doing this for instructional shift 2 is retrieval practice. And just kind of a disclaimer about retrieval practice. Have you ever heard students say, did we already do that? We didn't do that last year. I forgot. Or how do you do that? This is a common thing I hear in many classrooms. And the why, if there's only a few students and it doesn't happen often, it's a learning concern. But if it's many students and it happens time over time, it's an instructional concern and we're contributing to it. So we need to change how we review. I think review is one of the most misunderstood words in our education system. So we need to change how we review. What we currently see in our schools is not review. It's cramming for short-term success. This is not learning. I'll see review. I'll talk to teachers and say, okay, what are you doing before a quiz, or what are you doing before your provincial exam or your board exam, EQAO, or a standardized test? And we'll hear teachers say, well, we're reviewing. Well, no, you're not reviewing. It's spray and pray. You're putting everything out there and you're hoping that it sticks. But that doesn't work. That's not review. That's cramming, and it's not an effective use of our time. And we're going to come back to this. Remember, practice is essential to learning, but not all practice is equivalent. And something else to consider, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So retrieval practice, based on the cognitive science jargon, means every time a memory is retrieved, the individual must think about it. Once again, they must reconstruct it in terms of their prior knowledge and current experience, and then they reconsolidate it. So every time a memory is strengthened, every time a memory is retrieved, you strengthen it and you add details to it. So every time you recall a concept from the past, you're strengthening that concept. But your brain does something even more impressive. Every time you recall it, your brain strengthens pathways to it because your brain starts to actually recognize, oh, this is important, so I'm going to make it easier to find. And what that means is that every time you recall something, not only are you strengthening the memory, but you're making it easier to find the next time. So therefore, it can be argued retrieval practice is even more powerful than encoding or getting things in. It's kind of like if I asked everybody here if they could give me a definition of what an improper fraction is, you would be able to do that because you've engaged with that concept multiple times. However, if I asked you to define what a mitochondria is, you might struggle with that because you might not be interacting with that concept. If we only engage with stuff on a one time and then done, one and done, our brain does not strengthen that memory and it doesn't make it easier to find because it thinks, oh, well, we won't use that again. So it's through that retrieving of previous memory that it makes it stronger. And that therefore the power of retrieval or review is not a dipstick to check knowledge, but it's a learning process, and it's how we build our understanding and how we make it easier to retrieve. And there's three ways we can do this. We can do retrieval practice on a daily example, on a weekly example, and on a monthly example. Now, I could spend a whole hour going through these different types of retrieval practice, but well, then you would be here for multiple hours, and I think we would see numbers go down. So we're just going to go through these briefly. So one daily review structure is daily cumulative review. This would be a math warm-up type of activity that you would do in the classroom. And what it is it engages students in thinking mathematically. It's 4 questions that target multiple concepts, strategies, and skills, and it builds fluency. So think of it as a warm-up activity that addresses different concepts. What it's not a prelude to the day's lesson. So if you're focusing on perimeter area and volume, it's not about that. It's an independent warm-up task that tends to focus on 4 key concepts, and they're not heavy-duty, time-consuming exercises. And the structure of it, the first 3 to 5 minutes, the teacher assigns 4 questions with 1 question on a different concept. So there's 4 different questions with 4 different concepts. And the teacher assigns students to do that individually and independently. So that's the first 3 to 5 minutes. And the second 3 to 5 minutes, the teacher will then provide the solutions so that students can get feedback if they're correct or not. This isn't a time that we ask students to share their responses or to share their thinking, because we want them to engage with the concept, to retrieve it, so it strengthens the memory and it makes it easier to find. And we want to give them the solution so they have accurate feedback. And just a quick example here. Now, you won't have time now, but you can later. If you go to costellomath.com and click on resources, I have daily cumulative review questions for grades 1 through 8. And they're targeting the curriculum. I have one for Canada and one for Ontario. And the Canada one aligns with many in the States as well. And I have these from the first week of September to the last week in June. So you can use these, and there's 4 questions, and there's already created for you. Weekly review. Oh, and they're free, I should say. Weekly review structures. You could do a then, now, later grid where it's a 3x3 grid. The top row is the then, and that's a concept you previously explored in the year. The middle row is the now. That's a concept you're currently exploring. And the bottom row is the upcoming concept. So it's later. So in here, they're exploring 3 different concepts, a previous concept, the current one, and a future one. And the teacher might put this up on a bulletin board or print out a sheet for them or put it on a Google slide or a Google Doc. And the teacher can post this on Monday and then post the selection and then post the solutions on Friday so that students can get feedback. And I'm looking in the chat box. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that people use the daily cumulative review. And spread the wealth, share them with your colleagues. So we have the daily cumulative review as a daily example. We have the then, now, later as a weekly example, and a monthly example could be a check-in. And what I do for a check-in is I highlight key concepts in your year plan. And we have, let's say if you have 6 key concepts in your year, you have 6 check-ins. And what it is, you can see the cumulative approach. After you teach key concept 1, you then do a little check-in for key concept 1. And then you move on in the year. And then after you teach key concept 2, you address key concept 2, but you tag on key concept 1. And likewise throughout the year. So students are revisiting concepts as well. So here would be an example, key concept 1. This comes from a grade 3 class. No, sorry. Yeah, grade 3 class. So what we have is the first key concept was place value, whole number. So the teacher gave this as a check-in after they taught place value. And they did this at like the end of September, early October. So the teacher did this, gave it to them. Then the teacher moved on. Then the teacher started, and another few weeks after that, working with addition and subtraction. So the teacher did key concept 2 at the end of that work, but then tagged on key concept 1 so the students would return to it. And then when they did this after Christmas break, the teacher did fractions. So the teacher addressed key concept 3, but tagged on key concept 2 and tagged on key concept 1. So the students would be seeing these concepts over time. And we saw a trend occur, not only in the classroom, but across the grade levels and across schools. The first time a student would encounter the concept immediately after being taught, they would do relatively well with it because it's block practice. It's right in their mind. But then when they see the concept again, just put on there as a tag on, their score would plummet because they weren't used to seeing it and they weren't practicing it or recalling it. So they plummet. But then on successive check-ins where it kept being added as a tag on, students then outperform their original score because the more that we revisit it, the stronger our understanding of it gets, and it's easier to recall. Now, could you put daily, monthly, or no, daily, weekly, or a monthly? Are there any of these retrieval practices that you think you could use in the classroom? Either daily, weekly, or monthly? Could you put that in the chat box? I'm seeing people use DCR, some in the classroom. Okay. I'm seeing people use DCR. I'm seeing monthly, weekly. That is great. And so we've talked about cognitive load theory where we're chunking concepts. And what I do in the book is for each of these instructional shifts, I have taken the most problematic concepts that I hear from teachers students struggle with. So like fractions, multiplication, division, equations, measurement. There was actually data. And I have asked teachers, what did the students struggle with? And they've told me. So for each of these problematic concepts, I dig into each of the instructional shifts. So I chunk each of the concepts into here are the different foundational pieces of it. Then I go to the instructional shift 2. Here are some retrieval practices for that specific concept. And then that really leads me to the third instructional shift with it, which is metacognition. And now I'm just want to do a disclaimer on this one. I know that we've heard about metacognition for a long time. However, I think it's used so much that it runs the risk of becoming so broad that it loses its significance. So we must have intentionality from the teacher to support metacognition with students. We just can't say it's thinking about our thinking. That's too vague, and we're not supporting metacognition, and we're not seeing growth in terms of students as independent thinkers. And when I'm saying metacognition, I'm drilling back to the research here from 2021. And within metacognition is a concept referred to as metacognitive regulation. And metacognitive regulation refers to how one controls their thinking in the learning process. So think about this. Are we supporting our students in being able to control their thinking in the learning process? And there's three components within metacognitive regulation. One is planning. Are we supporting students, and are they controlling their thinking to decide on suitable strategies to use for the task? Are we supporting them in being able to make informed decisions and being able to work through the planning stage? Are we supporting students in being able to control their own thinking so that they're tracking their understanding progress and the quality of their work? And are we supporting students in being able to control their thinking when they're assessing the success of their work and their chosen strategy? Because many times when I've read about metacognition, it's okay, we're going to help students think about their thinking. But like I said, that's vague. And when something becomes so vague, it loses its meaning. So we're going to burrow down into the metacognitive regulation, how students can control their thinking in the learning process. And we're going to focus on planning, monitoring, and evaluation. And for that, we're going to use self-questioning. Now, here's what I hear when it comes to metacognition. I hear teachers say, well, we ask our students, does your work make sense? Does your work make sense? Here's the problem. If we're waiting until the very end of the learning task to engage students in metacognition, we're losing the opportunity for them to control their thinking and for them to be independent learners. And when we do this, or when we ask, does it make sense? We're taking the learning from students and putting it on teachers. This is a disconnect. This is not working. So we need to think about metacognition and self-questioning. And self-questioning is a metacognitive strategy that allows the learner to monitor their understanding and identify when their thinking comes off tracks. Have you ever had students come up to you at the end of a lesson and they're not sure if they're right or not? They're not sure if they've answered the question. They're not sure if their work makes sense. That shouldn't be allowed, because if we're telling students if they're right, or if we're telling students if they need to go back and rework this problem, then we're the ones doing the thinking, and they're becoming passive learners. So we're taking the work of John Hattie, knowing that metacognition and self-questioning are both high category in the barometer of influence. But we can't assume that students self-question on their own. Self-questioning is an important skill that needs to be explicitly taught. We as teachers need to foster the skill of self-questioning by creating an environment that promotes and values self-questioning. But how can we do that meaningfully? Well, we're going to look at it within the problem-solving context, because we want students to be problem solvers, and we want students to be able to control their thinking during the problem-solving process. So what I've done is I've really burrowed down into the metacognitive regulation, how to support students in planning their work, in monitoring their work, and in evaluating their work. And what can we specifically do to help them as they problem solve? So in the book, what I've done is I have generated many questions that that teachers can actually model, and that students can then use to self-question to guide their thinking during this stage. So here would be eight different questions students could ask themselves, and the teacher could use to generate the metacognitive regulation when students are understanding the problem. Here are 7 questions students can ask themselves when they're crafting their plan. Here are 8 questions students can ask when they're actually carrying out their plan. And here are 7 questions students can ask when they're reviewing their work. But then I'm thinking, okay, when we went through all these question types for each of the ones, I thought teachers want to see what it's like concept specific. So then what I've done is for these problematic concepts, I would give questions that are self questions, prompts that engage the different stages of metacognitive regulation and the different stages of problem solving, but that are concept specific. So these are questions that students can ask themselves that deal explicitly with equations. And I've done this for multiplication, division, for place value, for fractions, for measurement, data, because if we want students to be independent and if we want students to be able to judge the reasonableness of their work, we need to provide them with the tools. Okay, so I need you to do me a favor here. We've talked about explicit instruction with chunking. We've talked about application with retrieval. And we talked about metacognition with questioning. Can you put in the chat box which of these 3 shifts, and we got one more, but which of these 3 shifts would you be more apt to want to dive into in the classroom? Would it be explicit instruction, application, or metacognition? Which do you think would help your students and your colleagues out of these 3 instructional shifts? And if you could put those in the chat box, that gives me a chance to kind of get a drink for my throat. Okay. Aaron and Cindy for metacognition. No. Aaron for application. Cindy, metacognition. Edna, metacognition. Nalina, application. Margaret, metacognition. Aaron. So we're going to focus on those. So those are the 3. And metacognition. Okay, perfect. So I'm seeing a difference, which is great for that choice. Now, we're going on to the 4th instructional shift. Question, focus, and format. When students are provided questions that have the same focus, one that targets the same level of cognitive demand, students are missing out on the complexity of the concept and how it can apply to different situations. And we're going to look at cognitive levels and question format. So let's think about literacy for 1 second. Let's say that I always give students fiction books. I assign fiction books to read, and I give them opportunity to engage with fiction books in the classroom. Will students be able to learn how to read only using fiction books? Yes, they can. They can. They'll be able to learn to read even if they only use fiction books. However, we're cutting off a complete opportunity for them to engage with nonfiction books. So what we're doing is we're limiting their understanding of reading and their understanding of literacy by only focusing on the one type of book. We do the same thing in math. If we only give the same type of question, we're limiting students' opportunity to grow their knowledge of a concept and of themselves as problem solvers. So we're going to think about the different question focus areas we give and the different types of formats. And what I mean by question focus, there's really 3 kinds: knowledge and understanding, application, thinking. So knowledge and understanding. This is the whole literal type of, can students recall, recognize, solve, order, measure concepts? Can they recall information? Do they understand concepts? And can they apply them in direct situations? That would be like your cognitive level 1 type questions. And from what I've heard from many jurisdictions, students do relatively well in the knowledge and understanding. However, then we've got cognitive level 2, or another more cognitive demand, application. This is where students must apply a concept in a real world situation, or where they need to make connections between concepts, where they might have to represent, where they're not given a direct pathway. Students have to decide what's going on in this situation, what concept do I apply, and then they have to apply it. So that would be application type focus problems. And what I'm hearing more about is that students struggle with those in comparison to knowledge and understanding questions. And then we have our cognitive level 3, or our thinking questions, which are really novel problems, and they're critical thinking and they're problem solving. So this is where there's no apparent pathway at first, and students must work through the problem, understand it, and decide what's going on and what am I going to apply. Those are more complex problems, and students are finding difficulty with those. And when we're talking to classroom teachers, many of them will say, well, we spend quite a bit of time on the knowledge and understanding and not so much on the application and thinking. Well, that's because, and students struggle with that because they're not seeing as much in the classroom. And that's why when we chunk up our information or our concept, like from instructional shift 1, we can layer these questions throughout so that students can build their mastery of it. But it's not just the cognitive level 1, 2, and 3 or the question focus, but it's also the format. And I'm going to say this clearly, and I hope this makes sense. Give me an emoji if this makes sense. There's no one type of math question that's good enough that should be the only question provided to your students. There's no one question type that's good enough that should be the only questions type students are provided. We've got a continuum of problem types, and students need exposure with a range of question formats so that they grow their understanding of the concept, because the different question formats provide students opportunity to have different perspective of the concept. And the more exposure and the more experience students can have with different types of question formats, the more they'll be able to work with these different formats in the future. And there's different types of formats that we all should be engaging with in the classroom. True and false questions, multiple choice questions, procedural and calculation questions, word problems, and problem solving. Students need to have opportunities with those 5 different types of question formats. And what I've done in the book is, for the problematic concepts, I have identified questions and prompts for knowledge and understanding, application, and thinking question focus. But I've also done it for the 5 different formats too: true and false, multiple choice, procedural, calculation, word problem, and problem solving. And within those, I've shared, this is how you can create a quality problem. This is how you can create a quality multiple choice problem or a word problem and whatnot. So those would be our 4 instructional shifts. And for different question focus and format, if you go back to Costello Math and click on Problem Toolbox, what I have is you would select the grade level, either kindergarten or grade 1 to 3 primary, or grade 4 to 6 elementary. Then you would click on a key concept, then a problem type, and then select format. Independent gives you 5 questions, and instructional gives you 1 question. And when you hit generate or create, it'll show you the questions below that. And every time you hit generate or create, it'll give you different questions. And there's a bank of about 2,800 questions on that. So those are the 4 instructional shifts. Explicit instruction, which is about cognitive load theory, chunking. Number one. Number two, application through retrieval. Number three is metacognitive regulation, metacognition. How can students control their thinking during the learning process? And number four, question focus and format. And that's how it works. But I want to kind of highlight a resource because I get asked this quite a bit. Okay, well, how can this relate to kindergarten, grade 1, and grade 2? And there's a resource that I help support Pembroke with, and it's called I Can Do Math. And what I Can Do Math is, it has 90 interactive mini books. So there would be an example of one mini book. And within that one mini book, students would have 5 or 6 different prompts, different question prompts to engage with the concept. And when students would do that, they would complete all the questions. Then they would fold the paper up into a mini book. That becomes then a resource students can revert back to over time. They can revisit a concept with that. And what is it? Well, it's based on curriculum essentials for kindergarten, grade 1, and grade 2 students. And the activities investigate counting and numbers, addition and subtraction, problem solving, and geometry. And it's great for active learning, meaningful review, and assessment throughout the year. And I've had teachers tell me, well, we use it for small group tasks, so like math centers. We use it for guided math groups. We use it for independent practice. And if students haven't seen a concept for quite some time, we really use it as a way to revisit the concept and review. And like I said, these are, and there's 90 of them in there. And I was talking with a grade 1 teacher at Reading for the Love of It, and she was so kind to actually share this visual with me that the students were doing some great work with it. And there's different types of questions in there that they might not see in a regular math lesson. So they're engaging with that as well. Oh, thank you, Melissa, for putting that. And you can get that through Pembroke. So I Can Do Math, the book. I Can Do Math too, I think. But the book I Can Do Math addresses those 4 instructional shifts for K1 and 2. Explicit instruction, application, metacognition, and question focus and format. And here would be some of my books. So the first one, Making Math Stick, is all about retrieval practice. Mathematizing Student Thinking, it's all about removing the divide between school and home. Messing Around with Math, it has 700 problems for kindergarten to grade 6, and it addresses the key concepts, misconceptions, and it has problems to give students from a problem continuum of the different problem types. And it has something called Teacher Moves, where if you see this, then do this. I Can Do Math is for kindergarten to grade 2, and it has the 90 interactive meaning mini books, and it builds independence. And what's missing in math is the 4 instructional shifts. Because have you ever had students who struggle on tests, and you're like, well, why do they do better in class, but they struggle on tests? It's a large part because we're not engaging with these 4 instructional shifts as we should. And there would be my contact information. You can reach out to me by email at any time if you want to talk more about math, if you want to explore the book, if there's ways I can support you and your school. I'm doing quite a bit of work with boards and schools across Canada and into the States with this work, and we're seeing great growth in it. And it's really applying the science of learning in a way that's evidence-based, and we're seeing growth. And teachers are coming back saying, you know what, this is manageable. This makes sense. So I'm going to stop talking now, Lionel. That was a lot of me talking.
That was great. Thank you very much, David. It's we're pretty well on the hour, and we try to stick to it. And we usually have some time to chat, but we might sort of we'll pass on that today and sort of give you a chance to close us out here in just a minute. But just because you were talking about your books and you have such a wealth of them that support teachers, just let folks know that if because you've been here today, we'd like to thank you for that. And one of the things is that we can do is provide you with a $5 off coupon. So if you go to the Pembroke Publishers and you see one of David's books that appeal to you, when you go to purchase it and you get to the checkout, there'll be a place to put in the code, and you just put in MMI, that's an I there, 26. And that code's good for about a month, and it will give you a little bit off to help with it. And also another way of thanking David for all his work here. There's so much free stuff as well on the site, David. So thank you for that. I know that was your efforts and just didn't magically happen by the internet fairies somehow. So
thank you.
So just before we finish off here, I will say on behalf of everyone, thank you very much, Dave. It's always a pleasure to have you come and talk to math. I'll leave the last word to you, and if you'd like to close us out, and then I'll say good night to everyone as well.
Oh yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone for giving up your time and being here, whether you joined us live tonight or whether you'll be watching the recording. And I just want to share, I'm in this school. I'm a principal, and I have a teaching component, and I know how hard and how much effort that people's putting in on a daily basis. What's missing in math instruction is not just my rambling thoughts, but these are strategies that are proven to be effective, and they do make a difference, and they're evidence-based. And it really focuses on how students learn and taking that and infusing it into our teaching, so we're working smarter and not harder. So reach out if there's anything I can do, and I really believe that this can be a game changer for you. And I know Lionel and I talk quite a bit. When we see the science of learning in the classroom, people will tend to say, why have we waited so long for this? Like, it really does make a difference.
Great. Good. Well, thank you very much. And thanks, everyone. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.